Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to be talking to you about rational numbers and identifying them on a number line. All right, before we do that, we need to figure out what a rational number is. A rational number is simply a value, negative or positive, that can be written in fraction form. Okay, so pretty much any number out there. There are a set of numbers called irrational numbers that you'll learn on down the line, but for right now, need to know that the examples down here like negative 1/3, 0.75, and 0.3 repeating are all considered rational numbers. Negative 1/3 because it's a fraction, and since the definition is a number that can be written as a fraction, of course that's going to be rational. 0.75 is a decimal, I do realize, but remember decimals and fractions are really the same thing, just a different form. So 0.75 in fraction form is actually 3/4. And then finally 0.3 repeating. Repeating decimals are also considered rational because they can be written in fraction form. 0.3 repeating is actually 1/3. So notice if we modify these, they are all actually fractions. Okay, so any decimal that ends or any decimal that repeats is considered rational. All right, so let's take a look at some examples here of what you'll be asked to do. Mainly locating them on a number line. Locate 1 3/4 on a number line. So first of all, your standard number line, I'll just kind of draw a line out here, is always going to start with 0. 0 separates your negatives from your positives. Okay, and we'll put 1 right about here. Okay, and we can then put 2 right about here and give ourselves a little bit of room here, because when you're dealing with 1 3/4, that means you're going to go to 1, you're going to count to 1, but then you need to go 3/4 of the way to 2. All right, so that means if we're breaking that up into fourths, this would be 1/4, 2/4 or 1/2, and then 3/4. And the reason why I know I've correctly done that and broken it up into fourths is count the spaces in between. Notice how many I have. 4, which means it's been broken up evenly into fourths. So where would 3/4 be? Well, let me get rid of those arrows and we'll count that out. All right, you can count it out. Here's 1, 1/4, as I did, 2/4, which means 3/4 would be right here. So you would place your point then directly on that little notch, okay, on the number line. So that would be 1 3/4. All right, let's take a look at another example here. This time they want us to locate negative 2.5. And again, they're gonna jump back and forth from decimals to fractions. So just be prepared for that. If you're not sure what a fraction is, going back to that last example, if you're not exactly sure what the fraction is, you may need to modify it to a decimal, which is perfectly fine. In this case, you probably already have a decent idea of where this may be, but let me show you. Since we're moving in the negative direction, I'm going to place 0 right here to give me some room to the left, because again, the negative numbers always fall on the left of 0. So the first one would be negative 1. And then we also have negative 2. And then we would have negative 3. Okay, so thinking about what this number is saying, negative 2.5 or negative 2 and halfway to 3. That's what that means. So that means we need to go all the way to negative 2 and then halfway to negative 3. So halfway, we can just mark that with a little notch. And again, we've split it in half, into halves. That's basically how you know you've done that. So at that point, you can go ahead and place your point in the middle at negative 2.5. But just to kind of point a couple things out to you, you also have these little notches in between here. Okay, this would be considered negative 2.1. Okay, this would be considered negative 2.2. Okay, and so on and so forth until you finally get to negative 2.5. So just to point out that there are some other values in between there, of course. I just wanted to make sure that you've seen that. All right, so let's take a look at another one here. This time they want you to do negative 3 2/3. So since I neglected to do it last time, if you're not sure what 2/3 is or where it would fall on the number line, let me show you how to modify it to a decimal. First of all, if you're modifying a mixed number like this, and again it's a mixed number because if you have that whole number or integer in this case in the front, you really only need to worry about the fraction portion because the whole number will come along after the fact. So let's go ahead and modify 2/3. That's going to be 3 divided into 2. Okay, always the denominator into the numerator. All right, 3 cannot go into 2, so we're going to add a decimal and a place value there. Move your decimal straight up and divide. You end up 3 goes into 20 6 times. All right, and after you subtract and bring down, you have to add another place value, bring down that 0. You can see you're actually going to continue. So this actually becomes 0.6 repeating. All right, so our number we can actually make negative 3.6 repeating. So if you're not sure where 2/3 would fall, you can always modify it to a decimal like that and then place it on your number line. So again, I'm going to put 0 right here since I'm working more to the left because again, we're working with negative numbers. Then we have -1, -2, -3. All right, and then of course -4. So what this means, again, because it has -3 in the front, that we have to go all the way out to -3 first. So we get out to -3, and at that point we go basically 0.6 or 6/10 of the way to -4. So to do that, again, I showed you a moment ago, you can split it into halves if need be. So let me do that for you. If we split this into halves, that would be your 0.5. So again, think about which side 0.6 repeating would fall on. So here's your 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4. We have 0.5 and then 0.6. So -3.6 is going to fall approximately right there on that portion of the number line. Maybe a little to the left of it. You'll notice I did it just a bit to the left because -0.6 repeating is a little smaller in this case, a little smaller. All right, let's take a look at another example here, this time locating 5.25 on the number line. All right, so 5.25 is already a decimal, one we should be familiar with. Again, decimals like this, it's almost like money. That's like $5.25, okay? So if we draw our number line out here, again, keep in mind you don't always have to notch out every single number. We really just want to notch out the ones that are around where we're at. So for instance, since we're at 5.25, we can start here with 4, and then 5, and then 6, because that's the portion of the number line we're going to be working with. Because if you're working with larger numbers, it's difficult if you're working with 115 or 120 to have to notch out all that. It's not really necessary. All right, so let's go ahead. 5.25. We have to make sure that we go all the way out to 5, as I showed you before, which of course we're doing as creating our number line like this. We already kind of did. That means you're going to count all the way to 5. Then, just as we did before, it's a good idea maybe to split it up into halves, because by doing that you know where your 5.5 is. This is where 5.5 would be, and it just gives you a reference point of where 5.25 might fall. So 5.5 is also known as 5.50. Okay, to take that out to the same place value, and we're comparing 5.25 to 5.50, 5.25 is going to fall a little bit, in this case, to the left of that. So we have 5. This is going to be 5.1, 5.2. So we know that 5.25 here, let's say this is 5.3 and 4. We know that 5.25 should fall somewhere right in there. Okay? Sometimes they'll even want you to write that out. That's where 5.25 would be. All right. So as long as you take your time with this, they're not really too bad. The negatives can get a little confusing because, again, remember, the larger the negative value looks, the actual smaller it is. So just remember to go all the way out as far as you need to go with those, because it can get a little tricky. All right. So let's try identifying a few of these. Okay. So we have our little base number line here. And on this example, they're wanting you to identify the following letters. Now, in order to do this, you need to see how the number line is broken up. First of all, we're dealing with negative numbers. Okay, keep that in mind. Also, notice between -2 to -3 that there's 1, 2, 3, 4 places. That means that this has been broken up into fourths. Okay, you can also break stuff up into thirds. Let's say we have 1 here and 2 here. This would be broken up into thirds because, again, you have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 places. I know I didn't do that evenly, but I'm just trying to give you a visual. Sometimes they'll break it up into thirds, fourths, maybe even fifths. Just look at the number of spaces in between each of those notches, and that'll tell you. And the reason why you want to know that is because you can just start counting them out. And what I mean by that is this. we have, if we know that it's broken up into fourths, we know that this would have to be your 1/4. Whoops. This would have to be your 1/4. This would have to be your 2/4, and this would have to be your 3/4. That's a 2. Whoops. That's a 2. There we go. So that's why you want to figure out how it's all broken down, because then it makes it much easier to figure out where those points actually are. So now that we know that, let me get rid of that scratch work then. We know that if they want us to find this particular point here, if this was 1/4 and this was 2/4, we know we're dealing with -2 and 2/4. Now again, depending on what your teacher wants from you, they may want you to simplify that. What can 2/4 simplify down to? Of course, 1/2. So your actual answer should be -2 and 1/2, just like that. All right. So let's take a look at letter B then. So we move to the left. Letter B is located right here. All right. So again, let's notch out, or at least identify. Again, it's still into fourths. So this would be your 1/4. This is your 2/4. So it looks as though this time we're at the 3/4. Okay, so it's good to just make sure you count that out and be sure of it before you write it out. So our point here is going to be at -4, because we're all the way out to -4, and then 1, 2, 3/4. So -4 and 3/4, just like that. And then the last one is -5. Or excuse me, C, pardon me. The next number would be -5. But in this case, letter C is what they want us to find. All right, and letter C is right here. So if -5 starts on this line, that means we're only moving over one place. And since they're broken into fourths, we should know now that that would actually mean -5 and 1/4. So -5 and 1/4, and just of course always, just as a good habit to get into, look to make sure you can't simplify, as we had to with letter A, before you finalize your answer. This has been a quick tutorial on how to identify rational numbers on a number line.